How's it going, everyone? Session here. Welcome to the Futures Rewritten Theoretical Ultimate. What this is essentially is a presentation, just a fun one. I decided to, have my own fun after actually spending quite a bit of time doing the Ultimate, where essentially we are going to be discussing and kind of going through the Ultimate theoretically about how the story was and what it should have been, as well as the mechanics of what it was and what it should have been. And this video in particular will specifically cover the storytelling of the Ultimate as a whole. If you don't know, Ultimates usually are like what if scenarios that relate to the story plot line for the actual story that we've received throughout the plot, whether it's for the actual main story or if it's for the raid scenario. And so with Futures Rewritten being focused around the Eden's storyline, we were really expecting a very diverse and expansive storytelling between Reed and Gaia, and how they, transformation of her becoming Shiva and then Gaia becoming Oracle of Darkness resonates with the focus of Metron. And so this presentation is going to basically cover the current formats of the Ultimate and the storytelling as it is showcased as you actually go through it inside of the game. So if you go into Fru right now and you go through each of the phases, the storytelling that is actually being showcased, we will cover. But then I'm going to show you and kind of give my own personal intake on how I feel the story should have actually presented itself while maintaining the current functional flow of the story. So obviously there's a lot of things that people can think about where they should have changed it here and there, but I wanted to kind of keep it consistent with how the current Ultimate is and just kind of add my changes into it as well, making it very theoretical by concept. That being said, again, fun project. I was really passionate about this Ultimate in terms of me having my own feedback about it and hearing a lot of other people's feedback. We kind of did a lot of reactions to those kinds of things. And so I really wanted to make sure that I could at least showcase my thoughts and opinions on it, but also make it like a fun thing. And so I think this, like, learning how to actually apply all this is like a really fun idea, and I've never used some of the tools and resources that we're going to be using in the second video, if anything. So let's get started. Now, with that being said, what we'll be covering is, like I said, we're going to cover the storyline, the current Ultimate as it is, and then a reimagined version in theory, and we will go through each particular phase. So again, we're going to cover the phase of 1 through 5, and then I have created a theoretical phase 6, which again, I think a lot of people would agree that there just should have been a phase 6. I do like that the phase is all the phases currently we have are like concepted and they exist and they're really cool, but I just think that I wanted there to be a 6th phase, but I also wanted a lot of variation in difficulty across all the other phases as well. And so that's what we did here, which again, right now, my mindset, a lot of people would think that we kind of covered this in a previous video, but I talked about how the difficulty of Ultimates right now is like from easiest to hardest is like, it's like T, and then it's like a very small bump up into Ubu, and then like a good chunk into UCOB, and then a slight bump up, and then there's Fru. And then you got like a much larger chunk into DSR on top. So I think that Fru currently is listed as, like, I could be wrong, but I think it's a 3rd hardest Ultimate. But because they actually showcased that it should have been more lenient, leaning towards like the difficulty of DSR, I just didn't really feel that way, and that's why we have this project here today. So I just want to kind of like throw that out there to give you the understanding of where we came from. And so here we go. The story of Futures Rewritten. Now I want to give a fair warning. A lot of color, a lot of contrast. It's going to be very a lot. So I am sorry in advance because it's probably not going to be good on the eyes. But I think realistically, if it's too much for you, you can also just listen to me talk. And that way, because it's going to be like slides and like text pretty much, So if you want to get like a quick visual and then kind of turn away and like listen to the video, that works just as well. Now, let's get started. The Wandering Minstrel recurs the events of the Flood of Light from the cause of the flood to the struggles that followed, conjuring images in the mind's eye of an alternate future that may have unfolded for Reen. The Ultimate centers around the process in which Reen called upon the power of Shiva to release the element of ice in the empty as part of the restoration, serving as the final key. However, it is realized that the control and influence Reen had in her attempt to call upon Shiva is not solely her own, and rather than losing control of her will, she has been possessed by Metron, an Sessiion originally defeated by the heroes of the First, who served not only as Logos' protector, but promised to help her remember who she was prior to the Sundering. By the Oracle of Light's power and restoration of the night, returned to the first, Metron has broken free from his shackles, possessing Shiva unequivocally devoted as the usurper of frost to fulfill the promise made to Lawgriff. Pulling the mightiest being in Rain's heart into form creates the Fate Breaker. Felling the Fate Breaker, the usurper of frost takes form in an attempt to bring us down, and willingly unleashes the light within to do so, until the voice of Rain clashes with Metron, encases herself in ice to prevent the surge of light. Gaia, with her worries for Rain burying the surge of light, surged by the power of darkness, unleashes a mighty blow to the shell of ice, releasing Rain from her shell. Unknownst to the lost control of Rain from Metron's influence, and as a memory fragment of fate enters Shiva, Metron expresses their gratitude by providing further darkness to Gaia. Gaia is shocked by the realization of Metron's appearance, and before it is too late, is transformed into the Oracle of Darkness. The Oracle of Darkness, in form to Metron's promise, attempts to restore darkness to the star, repeating the events of memory known from past tale. With Memory's End seeing a continuance due to the fragment of fate weakening the link, Metron is determined to continue forward to complete Gaia's awakening, and any impediments to their resonance must be expunged. Metron calls forth the power of Thrace Velgar to weave a new dragon song, channeling the powers of the Oracles of Light and Darkness gathered. Metron seeks to create a new memory without the warriors and the Oracle of Light and complete the awakening. Enduring through the unleashed onslaught of the oracles, Metron is riddled through our survival and decides on another approach, to combine the energies of both light and dark within the oracles to become Pandora. The final oracle, still committed to fulfilling a promise, refused to be erased. However, in appearance of form, shocked by the fragment of fate endured to the end, Pandora's form is questioned while surrounded by memories of two friends, and the final battle commences. Pandora, committed to realizing a perfect utopia, carries out the final task of removing every trace of memory formed between Reen and Gaia while battling the oracles from within. Metron, distracted by the voices of light and darkness, commits to a final promise. Rend and loss is as not in existence holds meaning, as it cannot be fulfilled, but is slain by the warriors of light, restoring the promise and memories held by Reen and Gaia, as Metron is no more. Now, I think this is a really great segue to really showcase that the storytelling they had in mind for this, I thought was really, really nice. Again, the storytelling as a whole, from start to finish, is actually really well done. However, just the elements that they used in their process of actually like showcasing the storytelling is kind of where I wasn't too quickly gripped by the idea. I would also say that part of it is because of them revealing Pandora in the patch note key art. I think that's something that people were not really prepared for, and it may have like taken away some of the shine and luster that Metron and Pandora and the combination, that whole thing would have been like listed for, because I know during the actual world race and even the reveal of the ultimate as a whole, progging through it, I was very convinced that there was not the final boss known as Pandora, but then turns out that was the case scenario. So I digress. But now on to the theoreticals. Phase 1 storytelling is perfect. There's really nothing to note of change or anything. I don't really think that there's any reason for them to change Fatebreaker in terms of the storytelling process. I think that having Metron draw forth the darkness of Fatebreaker as like the first phase is like such an incredible segue. And for me personally, phase 1 might be like my favorite phase. But in terms of the storytelling, I think that it's perfect and I wouldn't change anything to it. And then realistically, we could not have had an Eden 2 Savage Boss, because that's technically the Voidwalker, right? That's actually Gaia in armor form before she even like has any idea like who she is per se. But because the storytelling created a scenario within Fru that Gaia has already familiarized herself with who she is in befriending Reen, there really isn't a reason for that boss to be like phase 1. Although I would totally understand that we would have liked them to use that boss as like a segue, right? But I think one of the rules that come into play with this is the duration of how long an ultimate would be or should be. And for them to actually go beyond like the 20-minute threshold, I think would have allowed them to do that. Or they had to break down a lot of the phases and kind of like chop it up a lot. And I think that would have been also like a great idea. But I think because of how it currently is, I actually do like the idea that it is the order that it is. I just would have wanted there to be a lot more in preparation for what there was to come. So there's that. Now with phase 2 intermission storytelling, it can continue as well with the fragment of Rain joining Shiva as the Super Frost, awakening Gaia. into the Oracle Darkness to complete their promise. I think the way how that works as like a puzzle, I thought that was incredible. However, the execution of that puzzle acquisition was not everyone's favorite, right? Because I think the impression that people got was that it was going to be like a, oh my gosh, like mind-blowing moment, and then like we didn't really get that. So it was very much like found on accident. And again, we'll cover this in a secondary video. I actually have created an entire raid plan for the entire fight in the theoretical perspective of how the fight should have been difficulty wise, but again, we'll cover that much later. So there you go. Throughout phase 3, we would have had the Oracle Darkness. Actually, let me kind of reverberate this like a little bit, because realistically with phase 2 and phase 1, I think the way that the storytelling is perfect. So from this point forward, because I forgot to mention this, I've decided to recreate and rewrite the way that the storytelling is performed with the mechanics in mind for the storytelling. So we completely will change everything as we know it. So with phase 1, like the progression of phase 1 from start to finish, I wouldn't change that. Mechanically, I would change, but in phase 1, I wouldn't change. Phase 2 and intermission, same thing, but I would have actually changed the storytelling with the mechanics in mind. And like we can resume and assume the idea that Gaia has to destroy the Ice Veil in order to have the Fragment of Fate drop, enter Shiva, and then transform into Oracle Darkness. So moving back to phase 3. Throughout phase 3, the Oracle would have had her awakening be interrupted by the memories of Reen to weaken the link between her and Metron while remaining in her awakened form. So I personally think that this would have been completed by using Healer LB3 during Memory's End, forcing Gaia to regain consciousness, wondering what happened to Reen, which then Gaia is repossessed by Metron in Shiva form, acknowledging the memories are weakening the link, taking us to phase 4. So what I mean by this is, during phase 3, if you go through phase 3 at the current situation that it is at hand, right? Everyone knows that like a melee LB3s, everyone does like their damage. And then you just got to basically bring the boss under 20% to like progress into phase 4, because Memories End wouldn't like KO you. So with the storytelling, there's not really any like visual representation for Gaia to appear in form while the Oracle of Darkness. So I've decided to recreate the theoretical concept that during Memories End, instead of having like melee LB3 or anybody just like do damage to the boss, to have it just kind of be like a two mechanical phase, I've decided that a healer LB3 was required, because I think that the idea of healer LB3, which will be used kind of often in this fight, actually will kind of reawaken the consciousness of Reen and or Gaia while they are in their like particular forms, because I just feel like it would have made a lot more sense that objectively the influence of Metron needs to be removed from Shiva and Reen. And I think that by having a scenario that you can actually create that with the mechanics in mind would have been a much more suitable situation versus having to just kind of like DPS and go crazy. So Gaia, I think, also should have had her own fragment. I call it the fragment of Gaia here, but I actually have a more specific name for it in the mechanical section. So I think that there would have been multiple memories going into phase 4, right? We only have the single one of the two of them together in the in phase 4, but I've actually created another scenario for this. So with that being said, Metron's materialization causes 3 fragments to appear as a result of the Oracle's fighting his influence. The fragments are Fate, Relativity, and Promise. Now, I think what I would have wanted in phase 4 is to have there be 3 memories instead of just 1. And mechanically executing everything would have been the exact same thing. But the thing is that the fragments of Fate and Relativity, since they're particular memories that Gaia has of herself with Reen, and Fate being Reen's memories that she has with Gaia, would have been the 2 components to create all the images that you see in Pandora that would have, again, like changed a lot of Metron's influence, because he's very, like, you know, ridiculed by the thoughts of what they're going through. So if we have the scenario where we create like the raid thing, then there would have been 3 memories in that phase 4 arena instead of just 1 appearing on the north. They would have each appeared on like a cardinal maybe, and then we would have had an objective, a new puzzle, if you will, to destroy one of the crystals, and which again I'll cover a lot later. So I just wanted to kind of make that understandable to what it was. So the fragments of Fate and Relativity belong to Reen and Gaia, forces us to destroy the fragment of Promise to force Metron to absorb the 2 fragments that remain as he creates Pandora. So as you know, when Metron is looking for another approach and then combines their powers together to create Pandora, the objective would have been to have Metron absorb whatever memories that are remaining, right? Because that's what he does with the crystals, with the fragment of fate that remains. But if you have him absorb both Reen and Gaia's fragment of fate and relativity, then it would have, for a better position, like weaken Pandora, right? And it may be like part of the whole like mechanical execution buff situation, whatever. But if you have the fragment of promise absorbed, then it's just kind of like an unclearable situation. So should Metron absorb the fragment of promise and fates or relativity, then it would skip the Pandora phase, and then Metron would just enter the Eden's promise tree mode, but it would be named either the promise of fate or promise of relativity and be that phase. And that promise phase is just a guaranteed fail phase. And I think that it would serve as like a very heavy punish for people who fail to execute the puzzle. I'm actually perfectly okay with them creating like branched out phases where there are ones that are, you know, like a fault, like a wrong ending, if you will, versus like the true ending. And for me, I kind of threw a little tidbit that like I feel like the wall being the thing that's a common place in Ultimates, I kind of sort of would just remove that and make it be like a punishment time waster. Again, that might not be it's very unethical for 14 as a game, but you know, I think that forcing you to let him have his way with you because he's like, haha, like you failed and I fulfilled my promise, so therefore you must suffer, I think also adds to the gravitas of like how much he's worked so hard to fulfill his promise to Logriff, right? So as a result, it's just one of those things that you have to sit back and like watch, right? And like let him just like eliminate you. I think that I would be perfectly okay with them incorporating that if I like, but again, if you fail the phase mechanical execution, then you're forced to see it. But if you don't ever fail it, then you like never see it. So granted, it being like a time waster and it being a unresolvable phase that will just inevitably wipe you out may seem kind of like, but I actually like that because again, I think it adds to a lot of the lore and storytelling of like the promise that he was trying to fulfill. So I'm a really big fan of that. So realistically, in this phase in particular, there will be 3 fragments. We have to destroy one of the 3. Metron absorbs the 2 that remain and then becomes Pandora. So now Pandora, suffering from the memories of fate and relativity, must be defeated so that the oracles in combined form retain their memories and consciousness without influence, separating themselves into from Metron, who still endures the promise that he refuses to let go. So now in this particular fight, Pandora, since has absorbed the memories of fate and relativity, has 2 debuffs that is a result of the puzzle from phase 4 and just gives a free LB3 that is used by a healer again during Paradise Lost, which is the enrage mechanic. So what would have happened in this fight is there would have been 3 LBs as opposed to 2 because we used the one for tank LB, which is for the like middle AoE, and then we have the finale that we get during the LB3 execution to the very end. Now I would have actually changed this so that you essentially can just require 3. You'd have 3 LBs and you'd have to figure out how to use them across the entire mechanical phase for the fight. And I would have actually liked for them to require like a tank LB, a DPS LB, and then the puzzle is to, during the enrage cast, because it seems like it's an enrage cast, you'd have to use LB3 by the healer, because once again, similar to what happened in phase 3, where you would have used it during Memory's End to separate Metron and his influence from Gaia to give her like temporary consciousness to be like, wait, like what? Why are you here? And then like boom, transforms back into the Oracle Darkness. That would have repeated in this phase. So I think that by having Pandora be hit with the LB3 will completely separate their Metron and their influence from both of them, but they would still be fused. So the objective is to actually like, you know, separate them again, but this time they just don't have Metron's influence. So healer LB3 being the puzzling step to separate Pandora from Metron, I think is like an ultimately great way to actually execute that. Now, I would have incorporated from this point that a cutscene would trigger when LB3 actually like goes off. It would actually show Metron in form, you know, like Eden's Promise, like Sessiion form, sure, right, being separated from Pandora, and then consciously is like, wow, like thank you so much for helping us out. You know, we really like, you know, appreciate you, and then we're here to bring Metron down once and for all. So then she would have blessed us with, I would have called the Promise of Friendship, which is a buff. and the buff would have provided obviously like a wide myriad of things that you need to bring into the final phase, right? So that being the insist, we would have to finish Metron once and for all. And I think that them giving Metron his final phase of him being like alone, right? Metron is devastated by his failure to commit to the promise of Logrith, and he becomes the Forgotten Promise, which I think is like such a perfect name for like a final boss for somebody who's been trying time and time again to fulfill this promise, and it's all failed. And despite all this, he's been completely left alone in the dark, right? So his final attempt now is to just eradicate everything because he's lost his will to live, right? His objective to fulfill the promise after all this time, it hasn't worked out. And as a result, he is entering this state of, not being able to go back to what he was working so hard for. And so now we enter phase 6. Now, Metron, lost forever with a promise held so close, has failed to create the perfect utopia destined for eternity. Hopelessly forgotten, he has lost his will to live, but refuses to let his promise fade and shatter. Right? So still clinging on to that promise, despite everything, is unable to actually allow it to push forward. He needs to get rid of the people responsible for it, which, we're sorry, but also like, come on. So now, clinging to what life he has left, he generates 3 fragments of memory as a result of creating the fate and relativity from Marine and Gaia and his own promise, right? Them all being, the anti-fragments, if you will, creates 3 more memories. And we once again enter like a phase idea where we have the memories of, or the fragments of despair, hatred, and loss. And I think that those are 3 that really gravitate to like an opposition of what the memories were from Reen and Gaia, right? And during his attempt to actually create the utopia that he was looking for with Logrith and himself. So like despair is essentially the anti-relativity, right? Hatred is the anti-fate, and loss is the anti-promise. So I think that we would have created an entirely 6th phase. I don't have that right now, which is fine. But then towards the mechanical enrage of phase 6, with the final blow planned to be dealt to the party from the Forgotten Promise, Pandora actually appears to repel the final attack. And then we kind of have a moment of like a cast bar being casted. The boss is going to execute like a final mechanic and destroy everybody and everything in his path. And then we had to finish him during that cast bar, and then we use like an LB3 or something of the nature. And then upon his defeat, the whole entire screen shatters, and the shatter is so dynamically like cinematic that it would separate Pandora back into Reen and Gaia, and then we'd have the finale as we know it today. So I think that is the method that I would have executed should we have actually had like a theoretical ultimate like storytelling perspective. Now obviously I think that there are things that you can add to this or even take away. Some of it is a little bit too much, some of it like not enough, but again I think that I really wanted to create the idea that Eden's Promise being like the final boss would have made a lot of more sense to me mechanically and even with storytelling in mind. And don't get me wrong, like Pandora is incredible, but I know for sure during the actual world race, watching everyone kind of crack at the fight, I was heavily thinking to myself that, there's no way that Pandora is like the final phase. Like that doesn't really make sense to me. Like why would they reveal that? And then turns out that that was the case scenario. And so I think that this being the final phase, like the actual finale, would have cinematically left us kind of in the like surprise factor, right? Because if they did use the key art to showcase that Pandora was like one of the bosses and that we're expected to deal with both Reen and Gaia combined, if it was like a false narrative and actually reveal that Eden's Promise and Metron final like Omega evil form is like the final boss, I think that would have been like the perfect segue of being like, oh my gosh, like I can't believe it, and then you go crazy over it. So I personally loved doing this. And again, this is just a storytelling perspective. I really am looking forward to, being able to kind of showcase a lot more of this in the future should we ever encounter a situation. And again, in truth, the only reason why we made this in the first place is because the storytelling that was had and through to my personal liking, it was good, but it just wasn't like, it didn't supersede like DSR on top. You know what I mean? I was hoping that it would be up there because for a lot of players, Shadowbringers is one of the like their first ever expansions that they got into. And so for a lot of players, Eden's storytelling is their first and also their favorite. And I was hoping that they could actually kind of bring that with them into the scenario. And not that they failed per se, but I think that they could have done a lot more to actually showcase that. And here's the truth: if they somehow come across this and they want to remake the Ultimate, which like they won't do that, but like if they did, then I have absolutely no problem with them using all this. I think that if they were able to say like, hey, we're gonna actually like retcon the way that the current Ultimate is and make like a Redux version, if you will, and they wanted to use this, I say please do, because I think that if you actually create this scenario, I might be invested even further than I thought I would be. So I'm looking forward to that situation if they ever comes to that light. But until then, I had a lot of fun, and this is only the first part. So here is the theoretical story of the Ultimate as it is. And of course, next time we will be covering the mechanical execution of the fight. So again, I've created the similar situation where mechanically we've done everything with the Ultimate, but I will showcase the other variations that should have or could have been added to the fight with relevancy as well to the story. It's not just there to make it much more difficult, although that's like definitely what I did. But I also wanted to make sure that people can actually find the difficulty equal to what I was looking for with like DSR in mind. And so we'll cover that in the next video. So hopefully you enjoyed this, and I'm sure that this is like a lot, but again, thank you for watching and tuning in. I appreciate it, and I hope to see you guys in the mechanical section of the presentation. So thank you, and I'll see you next time.